Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Ohioana Book Festival. I'm Jody Casella, and pleased to welcome you to Love is Complicated panel. We want to thank our festival sponsors and partners, all of whom you can find listed on the Ohioana website. And thanks to our official bookseller, the Book Loft of German Village. You can get copies of all the books featured at the festival by going online to bookloft.com. And now I'm pleased to announce our authors. Okay, so I'll say first that this is kind of a new forum for me because I've done panels at Ohioana before, but I've never done it in a Zoom format, so just bear with me. So the writers that are here with us today are Sarah Ann Carter, who's the author of The Ring. Sarah Ann is a lover of books. She's an avid reader and a book review blogger. She's been writing stories since she was a kid, constantly thinking of ideas that could be used as a plot for a novel. She's a journalist by trade and has written numerous newspaper articles. She's also worked in the public relations and marketing fields. She grew up as an Air Force brat and has lived in many states and countries. And she currently resides in Ohio, loves spending time with her family, reading and writing. She's a lover of travel and cats. So welcome, Sarah Ann. Teresa E. Liggins is the author of The Escort, etc. She has been writing and publishing since 2001, when of all things, her ballroom dance training became the inspiration of her first two novels, Life is But a Dream and Dance Me to the End of Love. From that point, she knew she had been bitten by the writing bug. Her biggest projects to date has been the revitalization of her three-part series, The Escort, etc., The Escort 2, Princess and the Surrogate, and The Escort 3, Son of an Escort, to be released in 2019 and 2020, respectively. Although born, raised, and currently lives in Columbus, Ohio, along her journey, she's also called Northern California and Chicago, Illinois home. So welcome to Teresa. Kerry Winfrey is the author of Waiting for Tom Hanks. Which is a romantic comedy from Berkeley, as well as the YA novels, Love and Other Alien Experiences, and Things Jolene Needs to Do Before She Bites It, both from File and Friends. When she's not writing, she's most likely baking a pie or watching far, far too many romantic comedies. She lives with her husband, son, and dog in the middle of Ohio. And she also has a new book out, Love in the Movies, what is it?
Not Like the Movies.
Not Like the Movies. Okay, we'll get to that more later. Okay, Not Like the Movies just came out. And last but not least, Jennifer Wortman. This is Love, Love, Love. It's an awesome title. She is the author of the story collection, This is Love, 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 with Split Lip Press. Her fiction, essays, and poetry appear in Tri-Quarterly, Copper Nickel, Glimmer Train, Electric Literature, Brevity, Hobart, North American Review, Juked, and elsewhere. A native of Gambier, Ohio, she currently lives with her family in Colorado, where she serves as associate fiction editor for Colorado Review and teaches at Lighthouse Writers Workshop. So welcome, Jennifer, and welcome all of the panelists on our Love is Complicated panel. I thought we could start by just going around, and if you don't mind, maybe we'll just start with Sarah, but each one of you will go through and just give us a brief description of the book that you have featured at the Ohioana Book Festival this year, just kind of a little bit about what the book is and maybe a little bit about what inspired you to write it. So Sarah Ann, do you go by Sarah Ann or Sarah?
It depends on how many Sarahs are around.
Oh, okay. Well, you're the only one. So Sarah, do you want to start and tell us a little bit about your book, The Ring?
Sure, I have it. The Ring. It kind of goes under the category of clean military romance. It's about a woman named Amanda. She lives up in Seattle near in Washington State and near a military base. And she knows she doesn't want to fall in love with anyone in the military. However, Lucas walks into the coffee shop she works and ends up changing her mind. The book goes through how they date and how the relationship goes, and then their marriage and dealing with the military lifestyle. It's ultimately a story about the ultimate sacrifices that some military families are called to make.
Nice. Okay. Teresa,
Yeah.
so you have the escort, etc.
I do. I have it here. And I thought it would be, if I could just read the synopsis, that pretty much will sum it up about what this book is. So The Escort, Etc. It's going to be the part one of a three-part series, and it's set in Chicago, Illinois. And more specifically, my main character lives in the iconic John Hancock building. So I'm not sure if anybody is on the panel here is familiar with it, but I got a picture of it right here. So Sebastian Marcellus. Now that my character's name is Sebastian, it's not Sebastian. It makes me cringe when people say Sebastian. It's Sebastian, and there's a little story behind that. But Sebastian Marcellus created an adventurous life for himself in an unconventional way, escorting the most elite women in Chicago and living decadently as a result. His unmatched flair for rendering his clients powerless to his sex appeal labeled him as the most sought-after escort in the Windy City. Having no desire or imagination for love and relationships, Sebastian was blindsided when Natalia Armani, art curator and restaurateur, who was coming off of a painful breakup, appeared like a vision before his eyes. Unable to ignore his awakened heart and romantic urges, Sebastian would ultimately choose the love for one over endless pleasures from many. But when his past clandestine lifestyle catches up with him, he must decide if confessing the truth is worth the risk of losing the love of his life, a decision that a jealous client forces him to make. So that is kind of it in a nutshell. However, when he does choose to give up the pleasures from many to explore the love of one, that's when the book takes off. And talk about love is complicated. I think life is complicated. So love definitely, of course, is complicated. That's where all the complications of his decision to fall in love, something that he vowed never to do, that's when, you know, the book gets really exciting. And it's a quick read. I write for the busy, and I write for those who claim that they are non-readers. So you can kind of get through it quickly, and therefore onto the sequel and then the third installment.
Thank you. That sounds interesting.
Thank you.
Carrie, so you've probably been talking a lot about not like the movies or just like the movies?
Yeah, not like the movies. I know. People say just like the movies a lot.
Okay, not like the movies. But now you got to go back and tell us a little bit about Waiting for Tom Hanks.
Yes. So Waiting for Tom Hanks is the first one in the series. And it is about a woman named Annie who's obsessed with romantic comedies to the point that it's kind of ruining her life because she is waiting around for someone like Tom Hanks from Sleepless in Seattle to come and fix her life while she works on her own romantic comedy screenplay. And then a rom-com starts filming in her neighborhood in German Village. She gets a job on set, meets the lead actor, who is nothing like Tom Hanks. But because it is a rom-com, you can kind of guess what's going to happen between them. So the next one, not like the movies, is about her best friend Chloe, who hates romantic comedies, doesn't believe in them. She's like a super busy person who is caring for her father, who has Alzheimer's, like helping everyone in her life, going to school and working. But unfortunately, the screenplay that Annie was writing is based on her life and a fictionalized version of her and her boss. So she keeps finding herself in all of these rom-com situations, even though that's not at all what she wants.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, Jennifer Wortman, do you want to tell us a little bit about this is Love, Love, Love?
Yes, it's kind of a tongue twister. Here's my book, This is Love, Love, Love. And as the title suggests, these stories grapple with love in various dimensions, particularly its edgier and darker side. So it's not a romance, it's a collection of short stories, literary fiction. And the title is a thought that the protagonist in the titular story has during sex. And I think it kind of encapsulates the book's attitude toward love. It's kind of jagged and fragmented and insistent. It's not, Harlequin or Hallmark territory. And, I was thinking about what Teresa was saying, that life is complicated. So of course, love is complicated. And I think, for me, love is such a lightning rod for so many other things, and just a great way to explore the human predicament. For as long as I can remember, I've been baffled by love, and how the source of such comfort and joy can also give rise to such cruelty and pain. And it brings out the best and the worst in people, the selfless and the selfish, and sometimes it's even hard to tell which is which, right? So a lot of that exploration is happening in this book. And then also along with it, depression is a driving force in the book, along with addiction, family dysfunction, all that happy stuff. But you'll also find a couple psychics and a pinball aficionado. There's some formal experimentation. So, there's a playful element there too. It's not all gloom and doom.
Okay. There's just listening to you talk about your books there, and I looked each one up beforehand, and they're all very, very different, and you've come at them from like different angles. You have different backgrounds. And Teresa, you mentioned this about love is complicated. I was thinking about the title too, and thinking of romance as a genre. And, maybe you think of, Carrie said she wrote rom-coms, and Sarah Ann said she wrote clean romance, and like there's like a range of romance here. And I guess I just wondered each person's take on the genre. Like you can talk about this any way you want to, but like what you think about the romance genre, if you think you're writing that, if you if you have a feeling about your readers, or why the genre is so popular. Like you can take this in any direction. And Sarah Ann, if you don't mind starting again.
I don't mind. I think the genre of romance is very complicated. There are so many, it's such a wide range, because you've got clean romance, Christian romance, Amish romance, you've got ones up on the middle, and then you've got all the way down to very descriptive. You've got ladies' book, they look at the dark side, or you look at the happy side. It's hard, because even when you go to place your book in a category, when you go to sell it, you're like, romance is such a wide category. Does that really fit?
Okay. Teresa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with Sarah that, romance does kind of, encapsulates a lot of subgenres. Like I write under, I call it contemporary fiction, basically. And under that, it is multicultural. I also have...
Sorry, I think my dog is from that.
Suspense, drama, and I even have a thriller, but they all kind of fall under the overall umbrella of romance.
So, and you've written a lot of books, right? I mean, have you written like more than 10 books, right?
Pardon me?
You've written more than 10
Yes.
books, and they're not all in that genre, you said. Okay.
Yeah, they're all fall under different subgenres, I like to say. So they're all contemporary fiction, and they all are under the romance category. But then the subgenres are the suspense, drama, and the thriller, and then romance. And like Jennifer said, it's not the Hallmark type of literary romance. It's pretty fun. I had a hard time at first trying to keep it out of erotica. So it's not in that category. So I did have to reel some of them back from that. But yeah, they're fun, they're playful, they're spicy.
Carrie?
Yeah, I agree that romance can really encompass so many things. And like Teresa was saying, she had to try to keep her books out of erotica. Like there are so many different ways you can go. Like my book is definitely closer to the Hallmark side than that, because it's pretty closed door. But there's so many things that romance can be, and it can blend over into so many other places, like literary fiction or women's fiction. Sometimes it can be hard to tell a difference. But I think the reason it's so popular, especially right now, is because things in the world are really tough. And when you're reading about someone falling in love, that is such a nice place of hope, where just for while you're reading that book, you know that it's going to be like a happily ever after, even if things along the way are really tough. And even if there are lots of hard parts of that plot, just having that sense of hope where you know everything is going to turn out okay, I think is what a lot of people want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jennifer?
Yeah, so I guess I don't really feel too qualified to talk about romance as a genre. Most of my reading and my training and writing would fall under literary fiction, which is a term that can sound kind of snooty, like, oh, it's literary fiction. But but I think in a way, I'm thinking about how literary fiction in a way is almost a negative category, in the sense that it's fiction that isn't necessarily following the conventions of genre. And so when I'm writing, I'm really coming from character. I'm not as worried about plot. I would like to be better at plot than I am. And I think, I think I have a lot to learn from romance writers in that regard. But, I'm really focusing on language and psychology. But I do think that romance in my writing does have a place, in the sense that there's this gap between the ideal and the real, and these characters who idealize and then bump up against reality and their own sort of baser impulses, and confront darker truths about themselves and the world. I think your typical romance fan might not be very satisfied with my writing on romance genre terms. They might like it for other reasons. But I also do think that I love soap operas a lot. I'm a big fan of soap operas, and I think some of that sensibility has made its way into my book. And I think there's some overlap maybe between that and some of what romance does, although romance, I think, typically has a pretty happy ending, although not always. Whereas what's cool about soap operas is there's never really an ending. There's always a new crisis around the corner. I'm drawn to that aspect of soap opera.
You mentioned something about how when you're looking at your stories, that you're thinking more about character as opposed to plot. I thought maybe we could talk about that, like how you approach writing, how everybody approaches writing, maybe a little bit about your process. If you, an idea to the revision, like if you outline ahead of time, or if you, what kind of things that you do to kind of work through a book. Sarah Ann, do you want to start again on that one?
Sure. I've currently written 4 books, and they've each kind of taken a different process. Only one's been published yet, but I tend to lean more towards having a general idea of where I'm going and make at least a general outline, kind of a chapter by chapter way to go, and just the key events that I do want to get into a book. And then I revise it as I go, as new characters come in, or things get changed. I found keeping notes of what's happening and people's names while I go in that outline really helps to prevent like scrolling back and forth, like what was that person's name. So I'll start with a general outline and then like fill in lots of details as I go.
Okay. Teresa?
Okay, yeah, so I've been writing for like 20 years, so it is a process, and the process kind of does change from book to book, but generally I have a title first. Well, it kind of goes with the concept. I kind of have an idea in my mind what I want to write about, and then I have a title. Then there's no outline for me. I just get my laptop and then I start writing. And once I start developing the characters, I let the characters tell the story. I may have an idea where I want it to go, but believe it or not, the characters have changed that direction on me a couple of books. And so I just, once they're develop, they write the story. I do, when I get probably halfway through, or I get a really good sense for who my characters are, the protagonist, the antagonist, and all my secondary characters, I have a Pinterest page about the book, and I start throwing ideas on that, in Pinterest. So, and that also helps my cover design artist to come up. We have a conversation about what the cover will be, but then I tell them, go look at my Pinterest page and then see all the pins that I have in there that kind of describes visually what the book is probably about, or at least what my characters are about. I actually, one time I wrote a book from, usually it's the beginning, middle, the end, right? I wrote the ending, then the beginning, and then the middle on one book. It was really bizarre how that happened, but I did it and it worked.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, when you said that, I just made me think of something. I had heard an author talking once about how she just wrote the kissing scenes. She started with the kissing scenes and then filled in all the transitions, which I thought, well, okay. So Carrie, what do you do? Are you do you kind of outline ahead of time, or are you more character driven?
I am more of an outliner. I used to not outline, and then I never finished those books. My first published book was the first one that really had a thorough outline. So I kind of realized, oh, this works much better for me. My outline always changes a lot throughout the process, but just kind of knowing where I'm going, even just having a few beats in mind, is always really helpful. And I wouldn't say that I ever, or don't always start with your character or plot. Like, I kind of think of my brain as the big compost heap where like everything that's going on is breaking down in there, and then something just pops up once in a while, and then that's my idea.
So, and Jennifer, you wrote stories. So, I mean, I guess that would be kind of a whole different process, because you've got this whole collection of stories, and then you're deciding this is a thematic thing that pulls them together.
Right. Yeah. It was a very different process. And in fact, I didn't really conceive of my book as a book initially. I was writing the stories in isolation over a very long period of time. And then over time, I started to see threads, connections, and decided to pursue a short story manuscript. So yeah, in that sense, I wasn't really looking at the big picture like the novelists are, but I am very much like Teresa in the sense that I just kind of work organically from character and conflict, and I don't outline. It's kind of, right now I am working on a project I'm conceiving of as a book, and it's hard. And the only way I'm able to do it is to break it down into little parts. Like, I'm thinking of it as a novel in stories, or linked stories rather than a novel, because it's just easier for me to wrap my head around. So I have these different sections, and I just dive into that chapter or story and kind of follow where it goes and revise based on where the energy seems to be. And then I'm going to do that again at the macro level once I have all these little pieces and parts. So it's for me, it's a sloppy and organic process.
Mm-hmm. So this is something I kind of wrote down questions before we started this, and I was thinking that the big elephant in the room to me is the whole COVID pandemic that we're living through. And I'm just wondering, as writers, how you feel. Like, I mean, I guess there's like several questions that kind of go along with this. Like, if you're, how your writing may or may not have changed during this time. Like, I have a lot of friends who are writers, and we're all talking about, like, we either feel, we have more time maybe, but maybe don't feel as creative, or it's harder to focus, whatever. So I'm kind of wondering, like, where your head is with this, if it's been, easier or harder, or just how you've been able to do it. And then there's like a second part to this, which is if you think things are going to change, like if you see your books in a different way or your stories in a different way going like post-pandemic, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm working on a book right now and I've been working on it for a year, and suddenly scenes in the book seem absurd to me if they have anything to do with a crowd, or any kind of like, oh, they're all in a space together, oh my god, this is a nightmare, like we can't have this, so I just wonder what other people are doing, grappling with that. If you want to handle any way you want to tackle that question, and maybe offer help to us out here that are struggling with it. And you guys can just like jump in if you whoever wants to go first on this one, or whatever you think.
I can go.
Okay.
Because this is so funny in a way that, okay, I wrote like crazy last year because I said I wanted to get all of my books finished that was in progress. And so I could have 2020 to travel and have fun and relax and not be writing all the time. And then this happened, and I was supposed to be on the beach in April. And then of course my flight got canceled and everything got canceled. So so far, and this is August, I've done 4 books. So this, I know it's crazy. And I'm going to start my 5th one. I'm trying to take a little break, but maybe in about a month. So I just adapt to the situation. And as a writer, I've been kind of isolated anyway. I love to write. I have a full-time job. So when I'm not doing that, as soon as I get off the clock there, and now that I'm working from home, I just switch computers and then I go right into writing. And so I don't get a whole lot of sleep, but so I've managed to just head down, fingers on the keyboard, on the keyboard, and just go. And I'm way ahead of schedule. The Escort, etc. I said it was a 3-part series. Well, the second part I published in February. And then the third one, I wasn't planning to do that till next year, and it's 450 pages, and I finished that. And so, that's what the pandemic has done for me. Is isolation was nothing new for me, except before it was a choice. I had option. So I just took advantage of the situation and I just started writing. So now I'm saying I'm going to finish everything this year. And so when everything opens up, I'm out of here.
You can travel.
And you're right about, when I'm writing now, these scenes where people are together and congregating, and it's just so weird. I'm like, should I leave it there? I'm like, yeah, you know what? Because this is not going to be forever like this. And so I didn't want the situation, the COVID situation, to change the way I write and think about what my characters are going through. So I'm just going to ignore that and continue the way I've always been.
Wow, that is very inspiring to me to hear that you've been able to write that much in this time. That's awesome.
I'll go next. I agree with her about not bringing COVID into a lot of fiction books. I think it's nice to go in and write and create go back to the world that we know it, because it's all fiction anyway, usually. I have 4 kids at home, so it's been 5 months of that. I actually got way ahead of writing the draft of a book in the early months because we had a routine with them doing virtual school. They had school in the morning. I had time to work on projects in the afternoon. But since summer's come, I've just worked on more editing because it's a little stressful trying to figure out what we're doing for school and what the sports they'll have. So it's been a little hard to get the creative juices flowing. So hopefully when we get back into a routine, we can get back into a new story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can go next. I would say I have not been as productive as I would like. I have one child, he's 4 years old, and he doesn't nap and he doesn't really like to sleep. So it's been a bit of a challenge to get anything done, but I have a book due in September. So just having that deadline means I have to write whether I want to or have the time to or not. So something is getting done. We'll see how good it is. but I'm definitely not mentioning COVID in this book just because, I mean, there are a lot of crowd scenes, which is definitely uncomfortable to write. I keep thinking, don't these people need masks? Like, what are they doing? No one's social distancing. But I don't know. I'm just kind of pretending this book is set in the past because I don't know at all what our mindsets will be like in a few years. I can't even fathom that right now. So I feel like I couldn't even incorporate that into a book even if I wanted to.
And then you're bringing up the point of like, by the time that book comes out, you would hope it would, would people want to read? They may not want to read about it if you were writing about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, my book, I began it before COVID. And it only takes place, at least so far, over, a few months of time. So I feel like I'm just going to situate it in the past. It's very interior, very much inside the character's head, and there's lots of surreal stuff. So it's not super like realistic anyway, but there are elements of the outside real world that impinge. So I feel like at some point I'll probably just put in some details that situate it in the pre-COVID era in some way, just small details. Otherwise, I'm not sweating it too much. As far as my productivity goes, I have 2 kids. They're older, they're independent, and yet, they need a little nudging for things. Otherwise, they would just stay in bed and not brush their teeth. Eat. They just do screen time all the time. So, they have needs. But also, I work from home typically. So being home hasn't been different. But being home with everybody else here has been an adjustment. And just the larger kind of zeitgeist, the kind of stress and agitation has entered my headspace and made me a little more sluggish in my production, but I'm just kind of plugging away and doing what I can.
Okay, well, switching gears just a little bit, when there's an audience at these, and I'm assuming there's a virtual audience, one of the questions that they always ask has to do with publishing, and they always want advice about how do you get published, or if you have an agent or not, or if there's any advice that you have or that you could share that would be helpful to people who are writers watching and who kind of want to know, like, how do I do this? I don't know who wants to jump in on that one first. I'll pick. So maybe we'll go backwards. So we'll just start with Jennifer again, and I'll go around the other way.
Yeah, well, I'll talk about my path a little bit. So it can be very hard to get an agent with a short story collection unless you also have a novel coming down the pike. So for me, I went with independent publishers. They are out there. They will accept your book unagented. Sometimes you have to enter contests that have reading fees. Some are very exorbitant, some are more reasonable. And I just found my publisher through, well, there was a book, I don't know if any of you have heard of Kristen Arnett. She has a book called Mostly Dead Things, and her first publisher was my publisher, Split Press. She had a short story collection that was out and was a big deal when I was looking for places to submit. So it caught my eye, and I tried the press, and they pulled my book from their submission queue. That's not, I think that's not the most conventional path. It's one path for getting your book published. If you can get an agent, it can be very helpful, especially if you're writing more commercial kinds of fiction, but there are a lot of other ways to go. I know people who self-publish too, and that's been a good path for them. So yeah, there are just lots of ways to do it. But I think looking at writers that you like and seeing what path they've taken, if they write similar fiction to you, can be one pathway, one way to go.
Carrie?
Yeah, much like Jennifer, I had kind of an unconventional start to my writing career. I also didn't have an agent when I got my first book deal. It was a small digital only press. And then I was lucky that I got picked up by a larger press, and I ended up getting my agent through that. So it was kind of a weird way to do it, but it worked out. But I would say that my main point of advice is to just steel yourself against rejection and kind of not care about it the most that you can, because there is no point in writing where you won't get rejected for something. Like I'm working on my 5th published book, and I still get rejected all the time, like for all kinds of things I didn't even know I could get rejected for. It never stops just because you get an agent or a book deal. So the sooner you can make it so that doesn't make you give up, like just see it as part of the job. And I think the sooner you can do that, the better.
Teresa?
Right now, I do self-publish. 20 years ago, I tried to go the traditional route. Things were way different back then than they are today, because publishing and getting an agent is such a subjective field anyway. And so I have submitted so many cover letters for submission for my books, and have, like Harry said, I had a whole stack of reject letters, and I kept them because I just didn't want to forget about what it took to get to that process. And I didn't take it personally, because I know just how subjective it is, and the guidelines were way more strict back then, and I think they are today. Today you can do things through email a little faster. Back 20 years ago, everything had to be snail mail, and you had to go into each agent had a website, and then you had to read their guidelines for submission. And every agent, there was no standard. Every agent had different guidelines, so it was a daunting task. And I did that way back when. So now that self-publishing is more popular and the brick and mortar are kind of phasing out, because I remember having a book signing at Barnes and Noble and because I was a self-publisher, they put me on a Tuesday night with this little table that was in some obscure location of the bookstore. So self-publishers back then were really kind of looked down upon. So I have never forgotten that experience, but I think I'm grateful for going through the experience, because now I have that to look back on and to know how far I've come today. So I do self-publish because I have a little bit more control of that, of my books, the whole creative process. So I think I will, until something different or better comes along, I will continue to do that route. But in my recommendation to anybody, getting into the field and having that question would be to, just check with other writers and authors. And like you said, look in the book. Like, I think Jennifer, you said that, look at your favorite author and look on the copyright page or wherever they put their information about their editor, and then do your research. Just do a lot of research.
Sarah Ann?
I did a lot of querying trying to find an agent for my books, and finally stumbled upon an independent publisher. And that's the way I went with mine. It's actually out of the UK. And that's what I'm pursuing for my 2nd book as well. It is an interesting market now with the self-publishing, print on demand, Amazon, digital only. So there's just a lot of books out there. I almost feel like having a book out there and having people read it will eventually help to get that, ideal of having it published through a traditional company. But just I write so that my story can be read by people. So even if it's only, 40, 50 people so far, it's out there in the world, as opposed to waiting 3, 4, 5 years for an agent to deem it's the right time, the right topic, and all that. And my advice to anyone going self-publishing or independent publisher is just to make sure it gets edited by somebody with a different set of eyes somehow. That has helped me with both my books, just to have, like, my family reads it, but to have someone else who is a professional editor look at it has improved my books tremendously. Because even in independent publishing, they have different varying standards, and there can be they'll print books that can have 100 typos, or they'll print a very well polished, and you want yours to look and stand out among that crowd.
So we have a little bit of time left, and I mean, I have other questions, but I was also wondering, because I think if we were in Ohioana in real life, you know, we could have more of a conversation. And I just wondered if any of you had questions for each other, or things that you want to talk about under this idea of love is complicated, or anything else. Or not, I mean.
When the title came out, when the email, I saw the email and that you changed the title of the panel discussion, Love is Complicated, I was thinking, oh darn, I wish that my other book that I wrote, To Love and to Cheat, if that was the featured book, but that was published a few years earlier, so it didn't qualify for the 2019 and for 2020. But that project was really interesting for me, because I actually did a lot of research to Love and to Cheat. I was curious as to why people cheat, and talk about being, you know, love being complicated. So what I did with that project, I gathered data. I had a questionnaire on my website. It was anonymous. And then I had a series of questions that you could answer, multiple choice with the radio buttons and such. And I also, you know, it just organically would interview people too. But when I compiled the data off of my website, I was, you know, kind of surprised. And the reason why I did this, I just didn't want my version of cheating, you know, to be reflected in the book. And I've been cheated on, but I never cheated. And so I felt like, okay, I didn't really qualify to talk about that. What I found, this was so amazing. So there was a mixture of the gender, and I would not ask for anything specific like your age, but I would have a range, age range. And then so you would, you know, pick, you know, wherever range you fall into. I was really surprised by the data that I got from that, and I was able to write the book based off of that data. But and I wish I still had that. I don't really have it, my hands on it right now. But there was at least equal, if not more, women who cheated than men that I found. And the reasons varied. And I gave, again, multiple choices of, you know, what best fit your situation, why you cheated. So because I did that research, I was able to then write this fiction about cheating. And it was to love and to cheat. So it's a play on to love and to cherish. And I wrote it from the mistress perspective. You know, I had a female who was the mistress for all these men who cheated. But then we also got to learn why from each individual partner that she had, why they were cheating, and they were all different. So that was a really interesting project that I did.
Wow. That is interesting.
Yeah, so that was talk about love being, you know, it's complicated. That definitely, I wrote the book on that.
So Sarah, I was thinking about what you said, how you grew up in Army bases, and then your book is set on an Army base, isn't it?
Air Force, yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, Air Force. So, what? I don't know. Do you want to say anything about that? Like what you drew from your own experiences, and
yeah,
what you made up or whatever.
I did a lot of pretty much most of the details about military life are true, because I do know a lot about that. So that was good to draw upon. I actually married someone in the military as well. So I knew the whole flying community. I knew the different bases. I've never been to Charleston, which is the base they moved to in this book, but so much of military bases are the same from growing up. So it's nice. I've had people ask me if the details are true. And I think that helps because I know from growing up in the military, if I read a book where it talks about the military, if the details aren't right, it's super hard to really get into it. So, talking about research, you do want to like try to make the details as true to life. I just recently read a book and it had a young man going to a Catholic church who never knew anything about those type of services and blended in right away. And I'm like, that just really wouldn't happen because there's just so many rituals that you would be out of place right away. And that's just kind of like, okay, well, what is this book really worth my time because they're not getting the details right? Because then the fiction story can come alive when it's got that backbone.
Mm-hmm. So Carrie, I've heard you talk before about when you were writing Tom Hanks that you had done a lot of research on romance tropes because the book follows all those and actually highlights them and talks about them. And I wonder, how do you, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about that, and also how do you make that fresh when you're like, a lot of romance as a genre, like in this, I know not everybody here is writing that, but if you are, it could almost be like a paint by number thing where the certain beats that have to happen and everything. And so how do you do that and kind of follow that and yet still make your work fresh and stand apart, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think that's definitely the big challenge in romance or in any kind of genre fiction where you have the standard beats and the tropes that you kind of do have to hit in a way to have it be considered part of the genre, but you don't want it to feel like something someone's read a million times already. So for me, you said I was watching a lot of romantic comedies. I watched 52 of them in 1 year for like a blog project I was doing. So I was well aware of which tropes are used a lot. But for me, I guess the way that I make it fresh is I do genuinely love those, even when I think they're ridiculous. Like even when I'm making fun of them, I still do see the value of them. And I think like Sarah was saying, you can tell when someone gets the details right of like what a lived experience is. Like I'm hoping that my genuine love for this thing that I studied for so long is coming through, and that's what's making it interesting. And in both of my books, I do maybe not subvert the tropes so much as point them out. They're both a little bit meta, like Tom Hanks in movies are in the title, so you can kind of tell that. But for me, I think more than subverting a trope, sometimes with genre fiction, it's more interesting and more fresh. Just really commit to it and do your best to really do it well. So yeah.
So Jennifer, I was thinking if you've had your work published in different literary magazines, and also you're an editor at a literary magazine, and I wonder how that works as a writer, like being an editor and a writer, and how that works, like going back and forth, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so my editor position, it's not a full-time job or even a job, it's volunteer, and I just put in a few hours a week here and there. But I tell you what, it works wonderfully in the sense that it's like just an ongoing master class in writing, to be on the other side of it, reading, evaluating other people's writing, and you see what really stands out, what's really working. You see the problems that come up again and again. And through doing that, you start to recognize that stuff in your own work and become a much better editor of your own work. That's what I found. So it's a great compliment, and I highly recommend, especially with literary fiction, if you can get a position as a reader at a literary journal, it's a really good way to learn. And there might be something comparable for that in it's harder to volunteer to be a reader for a big publishing house for novels, but there's some indie presses out there that look for volunteer readers or might even hire readers, and it's just a great learning experience. You can do it.
Hey, I think we have, Catherine, I don't know if we have enough time. I don't know if we have enough time really to go around with each person again. So I might go ahead and we'll see if anybody wants to add anything else. I guess just to remind everybody who's watching that all of their books are, oh, okay. We do have time for a final question. Okay. All right. So I have one more question, and this is, well, this will just be like a fun thing that has nothing to do with writing, but what's one thing that you do that is kind of like just for fun and not in any way related to writing, that might even be, I don't know, I don't want to say silly, but just like something that you do to totally unwind. And so we'll start with Sarah Ann.
Honestly, what I do to unwind is I read a lot. I read every day, but that kind of has to do with writing. Lately, since the COVID, I have gotten on Duolingo. Me and one of my daughters were learning French. So for 10, 15 minutes every day, because you can have a streak that you don't want to break, we get on and take some French lessons. So that's been kind of fun.
Nice. Teresa.
Okay, so when am I not writing?
Oh.
Actually, aside from writing, I'm a photographer. So I do that, and I've had a couple of requests for photo shoots during COVID, which was cool. I have a long lens, so have mask, we'll take photos. And I also have another business where I help people raise their credit score. I just so happen to have the highest FICO credit score that you could possibly have. I'm a geek when it comes to that sort of thing. So I help other people raise their credit score, and I coach them.
Yeah.
How fun. I mean, it's fun for me because it's a passion of mine. So I guess that's kind of unique in that sense. But yeah, that's what I do.
Nice. Karen.
I would say right.
Answering for you. You can make pies.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say, because I don't have a lot of free time right now. I'm to my kid and trying to finish a book that's due in a month. So really the only other thing I'm doing is baking. And I did kind of turn that into a writing related thing because I did put it into one of my books. But it's so nice to have something to focus on that does not involve my computer and involves my hands, and it's making something that, like when you write a book, people will like it or they will hate it. But when you make a pie, most people are probably going to like it. So it's a nice kind of less rejection based hobby.
Jennifer?
Yeah, so I kind of go in and out of this interest, but I love to do karaoke. I really just cut loose. It's a very it's a very good ventilation method for me. And of course now that means just shutting my door, and I have this, my family got me this little like karaoke microphone for my birthday. So it's just me in my room. Sometimes I can persuade my husband to join me, but yeah, karaoke is my jam. So yeah.
Okay, well, thank you all. I have to remind everyone that you can get copies of these books by our authors at the Book Loft of German Village. And I think you can go to their website, bookloft.com, to get those books. And just as a reminder, Sarah Ann Carter wrote The Ring, that's featured for the festival, and Teresa Liggins wrote The Escort, etc. And Carrie Winfrey has Waiting for Tom Hanks, and Jennifer Wortman has This is Love, Love, Love. Those are the books that are available. And other books by these authors too will be available too if they have other books, I'm sure. And thank you again to our festival sponsors and partners. And thank you for joining us. Please check out the Ohioana website for all of this year's festival programming. And that's it.
Thank you.